Day 131, Esther 1 through 4. Esther made queen. Chapter 1. Queen Vashti deposed. 2. Esther made queen. Mordecai uncovers a conspiracy. 3. Haman's plot to destroy the Jews. 4. Mordecai persuades Esther to help. Esther is more than a story about heroism. It is the story of how God controls the destinies of people and nations in spite of harrowing circumstances and opposition. Esther is faced with a deadly decision. Should she risk revealing her nationality in an attempt to dissuade the king, or should she protect her life and silently watch while her countrymen are slaughtered?
The Book of Esther, Chapter 1. Now it happened in the days of Ahasuerus, this is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces, that in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast to all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the province being before him, when he demonstrated the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. When these days were fulfilled, the king made a feast to all the people who were present in Shushan the palace, both great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were hangings of white cloth, of green and of blue, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The couches were of gold and silver, on a pavement of red and white and yellow and black marble. They gave them drink in vessels of gold, the vessels being different from one another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the bounty of the king. The drinking was according to the law. No one could compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house, that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains who ministered in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was beautiful to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by the chamberlains. Therefore was the king very angry, and his anger burned in him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all who knew the law and judgment, and the next to him were Carshena, Shesar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do to the queen Vashti according to the law, because she has not done the bidding of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the peoples who are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will come abroad to all women, to make their husbands contemptible in their eyes, when it shall be reported. The king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought in before him, but she didn't come. This day will the princesses of Persia and Media who have heard of the deed of the queen say the like to all the king's princes. So there will arise much contempt and wrath. If it please the king, let there go forth a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered. Let Vashti come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he shall make shall be published throughout all his kingdom, for it is great, all the wives will give to their husbands honor, both to great and small. The saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan, for he sent letters into all the king's provinces, into every province according to the writing of it, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and should speak according to the language of his people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was pacified, he remembered Vashti, and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants who ministered to him, Let there be beautiful young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, to the custody of Haggai the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. The thing pleased the king, and he did so. There was a certain Jew in Shushan the palace, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives, who had been carried away with Jeconiah king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away. He brought up Hadassah, who is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was fair and beautiful. And when her father and mother were dead, Mordecai took her for his own daughter. So it happened, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together to Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken into the king's house, in the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. The maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for her purification with her portions, and the 7 maidens who were to be given her out of the king's house, and he removed her and her maidens to the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not made known her people nor her relatives, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not make it known. Mordecai walked every day before the court of the woman's house to know how Esther did and what would become of her. Now when the turn of every maiden was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after it had been done to her as prescribed for the women 12 months, for so were the days of their purification accomplished, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with the things for the purifying of the women. Then in this way came the maiden to the king. Whatever she desired was given to her to go with her out of the house of the women to the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the next day she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz the king's chamberlain, who kept the concubines. She came in to the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and she was called by name. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in to the king, she required nothing but what Haggai the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. Esther obtained favor in the sight of all those who looked at her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal house, in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained favor and kindness in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast to all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he made a release to the provinces, and gave gifts according to the bounty of the king. When the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her relatives nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the threshold, were angry, and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. The thing became known to Mordecai, who showed it to Esther the queen, and Esther told the king of it in Mordecai's name. When inquisition was made of the matter, and it was found to be so, they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. Chapter 3. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advance him, and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. All the king's servants who were in the king's gate bowed down and did reverence to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai didn't bow down nor do him reverence. Then the king's servants who were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's commandment?" Now it came to pass, when they spoke daily to him, and he didn't listen to them, that they told Haman, to see how Mordecai's matter would turn out, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai didn't bow down, nor do him reverence, then Haman was full of wrath. But he scorned the thought of laying hands on Mordecai alone, for they had made known to him the people of Mordecai. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the 1st month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to month, to the 12th month, which is the month Adar. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of every people, neither do they keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to allow them to live. If it please the king, let it be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, to bring it into the king's treasuries." The king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. The king said to Haman, "The silver is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Then were the king's scribes called in the 1st month, on the 13th day, and there was written according to all that Haman commanded to the king's satraps, and to the governors who were over every province, and to the princes of every people, to every province according to the writing of it, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and it was sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. A copy of the writing, that the decree should be given out in every province, was published to all the peoples, that they should be ready against that day. The post went out in haste by the king's commandment, and the decree was given out in Shushan the palace. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4. Now when Mordecai knew all that was done, Mordecai tore his clothes, and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and a bitter cry. And he came even before the king's gate, for none might enter in within the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Esther's maidens and her chamberlains came and told her, and the queen was very grieved, and she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai, and to take his sackcloth from off of him, but he didn't receive it. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend on her, and charged him to go to Mordecai, to know what this was and why it was. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai, to the broad place of the city, which was before the king's gate. Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given out in Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it to her, and to charge her that she should go into the king, to make supplication to him, and to make request before him for her people. Hathach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Then Esther spoke to Hathach, and gave him a message to Mordecai, saying, "All the king's servants, and the people of the king's provinces, Do know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law for him, that he be put to death, except those to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter that he may live. But I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. They told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai bid them return this answer to Esther. Don't think to yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then will relief and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you haven't come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them, return this answer to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and you fast for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast in the same way, and so I will go in to the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.